We're thrilled to welcome you tonight to one of our series that's called Conversations That Matter. And we have had all sorts of topics over the last year, but tonight we're absolutely thrilled to be joined by Richard Olivier. And Richard has been a long friend to Hawkwood. In fact, I forgot to ask him earlier, but I can't remember when you first came to Hawkwood, Richard.
In the early 1990s.
1990s, so there we go. It's been a long and wonderful relationship. And tonight we're going to talk about archetypal wisdom for transitional times. And Richard, as you may or may not know, has been awarded Thought Leader 2013 by the Best Practice Institute and is the artistic director and founder of Olivier Mythodrama and Archetypes at Work. He is the author and leadership development consultant who specializes in developing transformational learning methods to help clients live into their highest future potential. His latest book is Archetypes at Work, which we're going to be chatting around archetypes this evening, and involving your story one character at a time. So it's with great pleasure that I'm going to have a conversation with Richard tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Richard.
Yeah.
And it would be lovely to hear about how people can really begin to understand this subject. Can you share a little bit about the history of archetypes for us?
Absolutely. So yes, hello to everyone, and big hello to those especially that I know, old friends. Thank you for coming. And yes, we are working now with archetypes, moved away a little bit from the Shakespeare stories, and my company still does both, but my focus is on developing this work. And archetypes essentially have been with us, I would suggest, almost forever. One of the things that I've found, I've studied archetypes on and off for 40 years now, since I met one of the founders of archetypal psychology, James Hillman, back in the 80s. And archetypes are eternal patterns in human nature and human culture. So they're kind of almost like in our DNA. And different cultures and different times tend to express them in subtly different ways. But you can often see there's a kind of through line that connects the different cultures and the different times together. But if we go way back to the earliest expressions of human culture that we yet know of on the planet, which are the cave paintings in Lesotho and other places, 30, 40,000 years ago, South Africa, they've just found some recently as well. These early expressions of human nature and human culture are archetypal. What is being depicted on those walls of those ancient caves are sort of initiation rites that involve hunters and gatherers, that involve shamans and leaders. And these mothers and fathers, these are very early expressions of what we would call kind of archetypal characters. And then as culture, progressed and evolved down through the ages, there was a real connection with this archetypal wisdom that in each culture, they created their own stories, their own myths that all had archetypal characters within it. And eventually, those became like the religious impulses or the sacred images that the culture referred to. So in Mesopotamia and then through ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, they created their own pantheon of goddesses and gods. And these essentially are archetypes, in disguise or with a slightly different focus. So every culture kind of creates its own version, really, of these archetypal patterns, which me and my co-founder Lawrence Hillman believe are universal. So every culture will have its own version of them. And then they kind of went dormant for a little bit, especially in the Dark Ages, but they came back with huge power in the Renaissance. The Renaissance famously was deliberately revisiting some of those ancient Greek and ancient Roman times, and Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, William Shakespeare, and many other great artists of the Renaissance are very archetypally informed and archetypally wise. And in fact, William Shakespeare uses the name of archetypes in his world, borrowing the Roman guys. These were the planets, at that time, the visible planets in the solar system. So he refers to Mars and Saturn and Venus many more times than he does Christian saints or the Christian God. So although he does refer to those as well, you can tell that his intuitive understanding was an archetypal wisdom. And then they went kind of dormant again a little bit and came back with the great psychoanalyst, Swiss psychoanalyst or Swiss-German psychoanalyst, Carl Gustav Jung at the beginning of the 20th century. And then they really kind of stuck. And James Hillman, who was my mentor in the work, who's Lawrence Hillman's father, really founded this whole school of archetypal psychology in the 1950s and the 1960s. And it's really been flourishing ever since. So we use the archetypes that are based on the planets in the solar system, because they actually seem to be the simplest way of defining the primal energies and the real kind of key dynamics that we have found and that we can see in the world.
Fascinating. So we're looking right back in history, but bringing it into the modern context now. And
ancient wisdom for modern times. That's
exactly. And we've got a lot of people arriving at Hawkwood right at this moment. Isn't that exciting? So forgive the background noise, because everyone's delighted to be here. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what archetypes you use in your work to share with everyone on the call tonight.
Sure, absolutely. So where we started with my friend Lawrence was looking at now all the planets in our solar system, which, as we said, have been used as archetypal patterns over a couple of thousand years now. So we use the 10 kind of key archetypes. We transform them from planets. So Mars becomes the warrior, Venus becomes the lover, etc. So we have our 10, and I'll just briefly explore them for those on the call, because we'd probably be easy or useful to refer to them as we move forward in this talk. And what we found is an easy way to remember them, because 10 can be quite a lot to try and get hold of, particularly in a 1-hour session, that there are realms, what we call life realms or leadership realms, that are at the center of this wheel. And we think that essentially, we can think of life as being a combination of ordering, relationships, creativity, change, and action. And that in order is about how we organize things, relationship about how we engage with people, creativity about how we innovate, change about how we manage transitions, and action about how we get things done. And we were able very simply, actually, once we came up with these 5 kind of inner realms, to be able to transfer 2 archetypes into each realm. So in the realm of order, we have the archetypes that we call the sovereign and the strategist. Now, the sovereign is the vision and the purpose. The sovereign part of us can access why we think we're here and what we're supposed to be doing with our lives. A little bit of what we call the executive function of the psyche. The sovereign enjoys being visible. They're happy being center stage, being seen, able to bless others, being generative in their approach. So they create order through vision. Whereas the strategist creates order through structure and mastery. So if the sovereign is center stage, the strategist might be more in the back room, doing the numbers, creating the roadmap of the ordering process, so people know what they're going to be doing when. And of course, both are important for any ordering process to be successful. In the realm of relationship, we have the nurturer and the lover. The nurturer is the part of us that knows how to care and to give empathy for people. It is often quite a developmental archetype or parental archetype. So it's often about how we help others, how we nurture others, how we develop others to become more of who they really are or could be. And that's distinct in relationship from the lover, who is more the part of us that gets connected to desire and beauty. So the lover is the part of us that wants to connect socially, not necessarily to develop other people, but just for the joy of relationship, the joy of relating. So the lover will build very rich social networks. They will want to talk to people about what is it you really desire? Where do you find beauty in the world? And this part of us also builds very valuable way of managing relationships. In the place of creativity, we have the dreamer and the storyteller. The dreamer is the part of us that can be in touch with imagination and inspiration. The part of us that kind of can intuit the pictures of the future before anyone else has really seen them. The part of us that may be connected with spirituality or gets a sense of unity and oneness when contemplating the universe. Whereas the storyteller is the part of us that engages more through communication and synthesis. So the storyteller connects the dots together, may find connections between otherwise unseen things that can come together with confluence and coherence and create greater whole than the sum of the parts. And the storyteller will then create a compelling narrative out of that new idea in a way that other people can see, understand, and follow it. In the place of change, we have the renegade and the transformer. Now, the renegade does change quick. They're like the lightning bolt that comes in and shakes up an individual life or a team or an organization or a community almost overnight. They are the invention and the disruption agents, creative disruption, hopefully, the ability to disrupt ourselves when we're getting a bit complacent or a bit stuck, and they have a great capacity to move quickly. Whereas the transformers, when faced with change, or the part of us that can access the transformer, because we all have access to all 10, that's really important. The transformer is the part of us that will prefer to do change more slowly, that really honors the mystery and knows the importance of regeneration. So they will work with the whole process of life, death, and rebirth into a new form or a new structure or a new life for ourselves. And last but not least, in the place of action, we have the warrior and the explorer. The warrior is the part of us that knows how to challenge, to get things done, how to defend our boundaries in order to protect our space or those we love or care about or those who are in our realm or our people or our team. The explorer is more connected to adventure and truth. So the explorer will climb the highest mountain because it's there, but they will also be studying perhaps philosophy and looking at the reasons why, why are we here? What is it about? What is life about? So they will explore both on the outer level and on the inner level. And so that brings us then back to the complete circle of 10. And having been working now with this model with Lawrence on and off for 20 years and pretty much full time for the last 5 years, we have found that everyone can find themselves within this model, and that there is nothing major that is missing. Again, there are many forms of archetypes. Archetypes can be divided in lots of ways, you know, from the classic kind of yin and yang, or masculine, feminine would be a two archetype structure. And we've found that the 10 is the one that we feel is complete, is coherent, and that people can get to grips with in a reasonable amount of time on a development or learning program.
Fantastic. And so I love the way you put that together. It's so clear. I think I actually want it on my wall now, so I can think about this when I'm working, because it's so useful, such a tool. And it'd be great to hear from you as to how you then begin to use these archetypes that you've identified. How do we put that into practice, or embody these?
So, you know, the methodology that I've been working with, and that I co-created 25 years ago when I was a theatre director and working at the Globe Theatre, we call Mythodrama. And it is a way of kind of dramatizing your own life for developmental purposes. So we use theatre techniques. We get people to act in their desired future. And we have been able to create, over the past 5 years, specific exercises that help people understand these 10 archetypes from the inside out, embody them, kind of stretch themselves into them. So if you imagine an actor rehearsing a role, they're in a rehearsal room for a period of time. And so we use that idea of the rehearsal room as our workshop structure. So people can begin to play with these archetypes in helpful ways, particularly perhaps the ones that people may feel they have least access to. So when we work in more detail, and when we do the proper sort of introduction to our archetype course in a month's time, we'll be introducing everyone much more to the notion of gifts and shadows. And there is a shadow of too much and a shadow of too little. And so the archetypes that I embody the most and that I feel are most me are really valuable, and they will serve us incredibly well. And they will be a mixture of nurture and nature. So how we were brought up and our own innate gifts that will come out. And we tend to work primarily in groups with 5 archetypes. The top 3, the ones that you use most, what we call your leading actors, and the bottom 2, your least used, that we call your more offstage actors. So the images of your leading actors are effectively like running the show of your life. Like leading actors in a play, you will see more of them than of the other characters. Then there'll probably be 4 or 5 supporting actors or archetypes. These are the ones that you can use and you maybe have a competency in, you know how to get in touch with them, but they're not your favorites. They don't really bring you alive and make you passionate when you're embodying them in the same way as your leading archetypes. And then almost everyone has a couple that are these more offstage actors that we either don't recognize the value in them, or we don't see that they could really be useful for us. And for some people, they may have had a negative experience with this archetype at another point in their life that's made them turn away from it. So a classic example, which I recognize in myself, is that people who have been bullied at a certain point in their life may really shy away from the warrior because they will associate the assertive nature of the warrior with over-aggressive nature that they've experienced in the past. So we often work with people who've had those kind of experiences to bring the warrior more center stage so that you can be assertive and forceful in your life and challenge and protect your boundaries more clearly and more effectively in the future. So the idea of the value of understanding your archetypal pattern, which is what we think about, how we describe this. We all have a kind of archetypal pattern that we are using right now. And often in life, particularly in times of transition, when we're going through a big personal change, but especially when society is going through a big change, as I'm sure everyone on the call will imagine has been happening the last year in our outer world, it is often true that the old pattern will not serve the future. So what you've done so far, what's got you where you are, is not necessarily going to get you where you want to be or where you need to be to face the emerging future. And that's when considering the possibility of a little archetypal repatterning, as we call it, or becoming future fit, being able to look at your archetypes, say, okay, maybe actually one of my traditional favorite archetypes, I'm overplaying it. I need to kind of dial it down a bit. And one of my lesser used archetypes, actually, maybe now is the time I could really use it and find some value in it. So how do I rehearse that and bring it up? Kind of turn up the volume of some of my lesser used ones. So that's what we find is that people who study all 10 archetypes, you know, who may be intrigued in the longer course that we're doing in the autumn, that's what they will do. They will experience all 10 archetypes over a 10-week program and really get to know themselves and the archetypes incredibly well, and have those 20 afternoons of rehearsal, so that after that, our experience so far, having done this now for 2 years, the online immersion programs, that people really can get in touch much more readily and much more easily with the archetype they need in that moment, on that day, on that meeting, or to face that difficult situation. So that's why we call this the tool of archetypes gives you the ability to be agile and resilient. So agile, yeah, because you can begin to move between one another. You're not just facing every situation in the same old way. And resilient, because having that choice makes you able to face and manage more situations with more ease and facility.
And I suppose it gives you much greater self-reflection in the way that you work in all situations, by recognizing the archetypes, but also would you say that this training would allow you to work better with others as you see people playing out archetypes, maybe in their work or in a different situation, that it gives you that reflection on what's at play in the bigger picture?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you can recognize these archetypal patterns in other people as soon as you begin to understand them in yourself. And particularly in relationships that are causing some stress, some difficulty, or some conflict, there will almost always be an archetypal conflict underneath. So for instance, you know, the warrior who wants to move fast and be assertive and get things done and drive ahead may often be at odds with others who really inhabit the nurturer more often, who want to take things slow, who want it to be about the people, who want us to take things easy and be comfortable as we move forward, whereas the warrior will want to challenge and get people out of their comfort zones. So there will be some archetypal tensions that often then get played out in personal relationships. So people understand others. They often can learn more compassion for others. And those who have done the longer immersions and done the majority of the archetypes are actually able to manage themselves and step into these different patterns in themselves and be more compassionate to others, that they can understand that actually, okay, so if I'm a warrior and that person's a nurturer, they're not just being slow, they're actually caring about people. So if I can embrace the value that they bring to the team or the community or wherever I'm working or living, then I can understand them rather than getting impatient with them. And that for many people who've done the course before, have said that's one of their biggest gifts from it.
And it also creates much more authentic leadership as well, because you're really knowing yourself as you move forward and thinking about the different scenarios. So yes, it's really helpful to hear about that. Thank you, Richard. I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit, I mean, is it okay to talk a little bit about the philosophy behind the archetypes?
Sure. Well, Lawrence and I, we've been kind of talking together and dreaming into this over 20 years now. So we've had a lot of time to think about the big picture of it. And essentially, we believe, both of us, in evolutionary consciousness, that as human beings, we do have what, as far as we know, the kind of unique capacity in this part of the universe to evolve, to imagine a different future and to step into it. And that then therefore applies to these archetypes as well, that these archetypes will meet our current level of consciousness, and we will have access to the level of consciousness through the archetypes. So again, to make it simple, or as simple enough, the warrior through the ages. 2,000 years ago, the warrior was what was often called a berserker. You were, as a warrior 2,000 years ago, you were rewarded and applauded for raiding the next village, killing all the men, probably stealing all the women and the gold, and bringing it back home. And that was being a good warrior 2,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, through a little bit of conscious evolution of the human race, the warrior was a defender of the faith, the notion of the onward Christian soldiers. So you wouldn't necessarily go and raid the next town, but if the next country had a different faith from you, and you were a defender of your faith, you absolutely were applauded and rewarded for invading that country, converting people to your faith, and usually killing all the men and stealing the women and the gold for good measure, and bringing it back home. Now, in our modern day, although some nations still think that invading neighboring nations of different faiths or different economic circumstances is okay, I think the majority of us absolutely know it's not. And where we see the warrior being expressed right now, at what I would call the cutting edge of contemporary culture, is in the Me Too movement, in Black Lives Matter, in the sustainability movement. So people who are defending their rights, defending the planet, are the modern warriors. And so that is, for me, is an evolutionary trajectory. And the capacity that we now have as we begin to express more of, well, particularly as we get to grips with the amazing discoveries of quantum physics, right, which really does seem to be pointing to the fact that we do have some capacity, not total capacity for sure, but some capacity to create our own future. Or as William Shakespeare would put it, we are such stuff as are made on. And if we dream a future and energize a particular future, we can begin to bring it into reality. And so our great hope for using the archetypes at this time is that we can actually begin to get archetype practitioners, people who want to get involved in this process and this method, can begin to access the leading edge of human consciousness. That it's not just what is the sovereign that we know now, and there are a lot of CEOs in companies and some presidents and prime ministers who would fit into the kind of classic current sovereign model. But what does the evolving sovereign look like? What does shared sovereignty look like as we move into a place perhaps of greater partnership or collaboration with other leaders, rather than being the single person on top of a pyramid, which tends to be the old paradigm? What else is coming in? And so we're really fascinated in that capacity to tap into the emerging future and try and get a little bit, if you like, almost ahead of the game. That if we think of some of the, the great geniuses of world history, and I think my favorite three probably are William Shakespeare, Albert Einstein, and Carl Jung, three of many, but that these were all people who were seen to be ahead of their time, that they were kind of tuning in to an emerging level of consciousness that the majority didn't have access to. And because I believe we are in a species rite of passage right now, that we are facing the biggest challenges that we've faced in human history, in this age of the Anthropocene that we are now in, that capacity to dream into and access the emerging future and to tap into the current kind of highest level of consciousness that is available will be a great gift. And that's part of our lab work and our experimentation at the moment.
It's so important. I mean, it's fascinating to see that this methodology is being used to horizon scan, and there's other capabilities as well that are coming through at the moment. I know UNESCO, for example, are doing quite a lot of work around futures literacy, and it all helps inform the now. If we can dream into the future, it helps our behavior now and how we can be the very best person we can possibly be. So it's really exciting to hear about your work. Thank you. I really appreciate it. What an honor to be here tonight. So I would just love to hear a little bit about the developmental paths that you mentioned to me before this course and before this call, and maybe you could share a little bit of that knowledge with everyone here.
Sure. So there are many ways we can go about development. I know many people on the call will have found their own ways in the past, but the two, if we were going to define it, very simply in a binary pair, I would call horizontal development and vertical development. So for us, horizontal development would be across the archetypal wheel. So I know I can be the nurturer really well. I know how to take care of people, how to develop people. Wouldn't it be interesting if I learned how to be a bit more competitive or a bit more driven or a bit more ambitious in my life and develop the warrior? So horizontal development is really developing the ones that I have lesser access to. So I kind of bring the balance up and get more access to those that traditionally I don't inhabit as much as my favorites. And that will always be valuable learning for people. Jung said, sort of making the shadow more conscious, shining a light into the shadowy areas that I don't pay much attention to. The vertical direction is essentially what I was just talking about, the evolving notion of the archetype. So if I'm the nurturer and I want to get in touch with the warrior, it's going to be very hard for me to get in touch with the evolving edge of the warrior. I probably need to get in touch right now with the classic warrior that can help me defend my boundaries and be more challenging in my life or work. Whereas if I am a sovereign, and that's an archetype that I embody really easily and have ready access to, that will be much easier for me to explore the evolving aspects of the archetype. So I go from what we might call the contemporary access of the sovereign, and I set myself a research challenge to find out what is the evolving aspect of the sovereign. And because I already have easy access to the contemporary version, I will have a step up and it will be much easier for me in that circumstance to develop my vertical, to expand vertically into what we might call the evolving sovereign, and think about what are the real evolutionary stages of vision and purpose that we can see manifesting in various parts of the planet right now, or on the leading edge.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And leading into that very beautifully, what are the transitions and shifts you see at the moment? You've talked a little bit about this already through the warrior, for example, but what are the recent transitions and shifts in society that you see, and what archetypes do you see at play at the moment in a global context?
Yeah.
That's an easy question, isn't it?
Well, here I would refer back to, again, the emerging school of what's known as archetypal cosmology, which is a big term, but Richard Tarnas, the great archetypal philosopher, is probably one of the leading exponents of this at the moment. And this is referring back again to what is happening with the planets in the sky. What are the big conjunctions and relationships of these archetypes in the sky? That the archetypal cosmology really lives that old adage of as above, so below. Not that this is causative, but that it is, in Jungian terms, synchronistic. That what we can see in the heavens above is likely to be playing out in the world below. And so right now, we are at the end of a very intense period, and I'll use the archetypes. The planets would be Pluto and Saturn. The archetypes would be the transformer and the strategist. And when the transformer operates on the strategist, you will see a breakdown of old structures. You will see a sense of life and death being at stake. You will see a sense of deep transformation and probably a big resistance to transformation. So the strategist will want to hang on to the old rules. The transformer will want to go into that death and rebirth process, and there will be tension between them. The strategist may get quite repressive. You know, lockdown is an absolutely quintessential kind of strategist term. The fear of death also can appear in that saturnine strategist mode. And that's what we've been in for the last couple of years. This year, very specifically, we are having a very great tension between Saturn and Uranus. So that's the strategist again, and the renegade. And the renegade strategist tension operates in extremes: polarization, rebellion, people on the streets, people marching, and repression of the marching, repression of those who are trying to find their freedom in different ways. And all the way this year, you've seen it from you know, the Capitol riots in Washington through to what's happening in Myanmar, what's happening in Hong Kong right now, as well as in numerous other places in the world. This kind of contrary impulse between the quest for freedom and liberation and the quest for control and going back to the way things were. And that this and next year we will, I believe, experience some of the greatest polarization that we will experience in our lives. And that I think we can see is playing out this year already. Now, the thing to do with archetypes that are apparently in opposition, same as if they're in opposition in a relationship, is to think about how can we bring them together? How can we create coherence between these archetypes? So, you know, if in the relationship example, if I'm the nurturer and I want to learn to be the warrior, or I'm having a struggle with a warrior partner, you know, there would be a figuring out how can we be more nurturing warriors, or how could we be more warrior nurturers in this organization or this team? What would be a good mix of the two? So instead of polarizing, you try and marry them together, or create what we call a hybrid role. So if we then go back out to the external, to the world archetypal pattern right now, the key to kind of get through this year and next year would be to see what is absolutely quintessential in my old structures, whether it's in my life, my organization, my attitudes, that I really need to hold on to. And then in the renegade mode, what is it I need to break apart? What are the old ways of doing or being that I actually need to simply stop doing? And then to move more into the renegade, what are the emerging new ideas? What are the new things that are calling to me in life that I really need to embrace, that if I keep doing everything I'm currently doing, I will never have time for, or I will never create the space for? So creating what we might call the sacred marriage between the best of the old and the best of the emerging new. That would be an archetypally informed view of what our task is right now as individuals, leaders, and coaches, consultants, whoever and wherever we may be.
Amazing. I think I want to come on your course, Richard.
Please, please.
We've just had a lovely question in the chat from someone who says they'd love to know more about the courses that you've got coming up. And do please, if anyone else has any questions to share, I know we've got another question from Steve, do please pop them in the chat and we can share them. But maybe you'd like to share, we've got a couple of things coming up, haven't we, Richard, via the Hawkwood online program?
Yes, so the end of July, we're doing a more formal introduction to introduce you to the 10 archetypes in more detail, but also noticing what the gifts and the shadows are, the shadow of too much as well as the shadow of too little. So there'll be a much more sort of practical way of getting to grips with that, and a possibility of also identifying your current archetypal pattern. And that's the kind of formal introduction to the program, to give people a heads up on all 10 in more detail than we have time for today. And then the course itself, which starts in the middle of September, is the kind of the deep dive. It is the rehearsal room. And you can sign up for anything from 1 to 10 archetypes. We do two workshops a week, 1 archetype a week, so it's a 10-week program, and you will get a really good workout in those like 7.5 to 8 hours where we are online each week. We go through a series of exercises. There's a lot of co-coaching, there's a lot of breakout rooms, there's little bits of input. I will be a thought leader on the program. I've got the amazing Archetypes at Work team who've been developing the program with me now for the past 3 years, and they will be leading through most of the exercises, and I will be around as much as is helpful in my sort of thought leader role to do bits of input on each archetype, the evolving archetype, where we might see it in the world, and perhaps the more complex bits of input that may be around. And that course is open to absolutely everyone, and it is something that can serve people for both personal and professional development. So as an individual, you will learn more about your current gifts and be able to rebalance your archetypal pattern. And it is also for practitioners, for coaches, consultants, folks in HR, trainers, therapists, anyone involved in developing others. We believe this is such an effective tool for development that we don't want to keep it to ourselves. We want to share it with people and train others. And we've just started our Archetypes at Work Guild of practitioners, and we've just signed up our first coaches who have completed the first training for that. And so after that course, for the practitioners who are interested, there will be different follow-up options, how to facilitate the archetypes with groups. It works so well to do it with teams and colleagues who work together to see where all the archetypal patterns are. One-to-one coaching or therapy, how to use it to help individuals develop more of themselves or overcome problems, and indeed coaching for groups. And we've also just spent 2 years working on a preference report. So we now have our own kind of profiling tool using the archetypes that we're literally just launching this month with a few clients that we're very excited about. So people can actually kind of get a report that tells them what archetypes they are using and gives them some development options for the future.
Lovely, because I know you work actually with corporates as well, all over the world, don't you, in many different contexts. So it's great, it can be used in so many settings. And that Steve has a question here. Steve says, if I can't do all 10 archetypes in the autumn, should I focus on my leading actors or the ones I'm less comfortable with? Great question.
I would say it depends. And if you can come on the introduction or follow up with it, I imagine it will be recorded as well. It will probably help you decide on that. It's like if you feel that your current archetypes are in need of a boost, your current pattern is serving you well, but you'd like to learn more about it, then absolutely, coming on your favorites will give you a refresher and a slight upgrade in those current archetypes. But if there are others that you recognize, actually, you know, at this time in my life, some of my lesser used archetypes would be really helpful because of what I'm facing or transitions I'm going through or even dreams for the future, then those would be ideal as well. And you know, people do different numbers. Of the last 4 programs we've done, people have probably averaged doing about 5 or 6, with some people doing about 3 and some people doing all 10. So, but particularly the practitioners who want to use it in their work, not just for personal development, we would really recommend doing as many as possible, and 10 if possible. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And how have you found it working in the online setting with quite complex roles and working with people? How's that come forward in your work? Has that been challenging, or is it worked okay? How have you found it?
It's worked seriously well. In fact, to the point where I don't think I could do this course face to face, because it would take at least 10 days, and not many people have 10 days straight that they can give to a development program. And also because of integration. So by doing 2 afternoons a week, you know, you kind of get an introduction, you get a taster of an archetype, you then do a deeper dive, introduction on Tuesday, deeper dive on Thursday, and you get all weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, to integrate it before you start the prep. And there's a little bit of prep homework for each one. So that rhythm actually works perfectly for us. And I can't imagine anyone really being able to show up to the same venue in the same place 20 afternoons over 10 weeks. So online, actually, this was the great gift for us and for this work in the whole lockdown and COVID scenario, was that it forced us to move it online, and it worked pretty much from the get-go. We saw the value in the slower incremental build rather than trying to get hold of 10 archetypes in a very short period of time.
Fantastic, yeah. So in fact, it's pushed a lot of people to work very, very differently. So we're seeing a lot of emergence at the moment, aren't we, about how we work and how we work online. And I can imagine with you leading it, Richard, with your amazing team, that it will be brilliantly facilitated. I see Rachel's got a question. Rachel, would you like to come forward and ask your question?
Hi, Richard, and everyone. Good to see you. No, I'm just curious about the somatic dimension, because, you know, as coaches working with this kind of thing, we work a lot with embodiment. And I'm wondering what your practices are when you're doing this online. Or is it, you know, it's been a great challenge for everybody putting everything that we do online.
Yeah. No, well, we just go into the rehearsal room. We get people to stand, we get people to do gestures. We're going to do the gestures on the introduction. We absolutely get people to embody the shadow of too little and too much. We get people to do little, what we call mini constellations, about moving from one archetypal pattern into another archetypal pattern. So we work really in an integral model. So there's physical embodiment. There is emotional engagement, both in terms of personal connections that people make. We've had people make lasting friendships by connecting on the online courses we did last year. And we add poetry and stories and little mini case studies to get the feeling of an archetype. Obviously, there's input, so we engage people cognitively, and we have some models and PowerPoints and stuff, but we also engage people imaginatively, and they get to think about and really see, how is this archetype going to help me in the future, and then sort of act it in and embody it. So we've had a lot of fun with it. A lot of the work is done in breakout rooms. So people are in pairs, 3s, 4s, really doing stuff. It's not a chalk and talk course at all. It's very active and interactive.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. I mean, it's extraordinary what can be achieved in the Zoom room or whatever platform one uses. I mean, we ran a conference recently where we we were working with Otto Scharmer from MIT, and then we took it into social presencing theatre, where we had a whole constellation work online. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. So you can achieve amazing things, although it may feel slightly unusual at first. I just wondered, does anyone else here have a question for Richard? Maybe not. You've given such a comprehensive overview, Richard. It's been fantastic. Can't see any more questions at the moment.
I have a quick question.
Oh, Jonathan, is that to Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you. I'd love a copy of the diagram, Richard, if that's possible, of the 10 archetypes. I just like to look at it. It just looks fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. We can send a PDF through to Miriam and Alicia, and then can absolutely get hold of that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's been incredibly interesting.
Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm so glad, Jonathan. Well, if there are no more questions, what we will probably do is draw this conversation to a close. And I'd like to extend my huge thanks to Richard for joining us tonight and sharing all his knowledge and wisdom, and giving us so much to think about in such a short period of time. I'm sure we'll all be going away with our minds buzzing with thoughts and reflecting on what archetypes we are for the evening. But I really hope that you'll come and join us on our courses with Richard. And if you have any questions, you must just contact us at Hawkwood and we'll send you all the information. But thank you, Richard, for joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk through such an important topic. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to work with and for Hawkwood. You're doing great work. And I look forward to the time we can get back in person. But meantime, to collaborate like this is a great next step. So thank you.
Yes, it's perfect. It's lovely. Good. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we really, really hope to see you soon. Thank you.